Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a morning update. Last night, we finished the show talking about RICO, money laundering, some of the different tools that investigators have to combat those sorts of things, and we sort of got into a little bit about what those tools mean, talking about Title 31, suspicious activity reports, the FinCEN database. And today's article is going to feed right into all of that. Today's article is from the New York Times, and it was originally published on July 23rd of 2019. The authors of the article, David Enrich and Joe Becker. The headline, Jeffrey Epstein moved money overseas in transactions his bank flagged to the U.S. So what this shows you here is we were discussing what the IRS agent would do as far as prosecuting Epstein's crimes and going after these financial crimes. And one of the tools he talked about was the suspicious activity reports. And in this article, they're saying that Deutsche Bank dropped some suspicious activity reports into the Epstein account, and the feds, well, either they knew they were there and ignored them, or they're absolutely and utterly incompetent at their jobs. It is very, very unlikely that the regulators and the federal government had no idea about these financial transactions. In my opinion, they ignored them. Because you see, folks, what they would want you to believe is that this is some huge conspiracy theory, that all of this stuff is just BS. There's no way none of it happened. But the reality of it is, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is a cover-up. As Deutsche Bank officials this year scrambled to extricate themselves from a years-long relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, the wealthy financier, pedophile, charged this month with sex trafficking, they uncovered suspicious transactions in which Mr. Epstein had moved money out of the United States. Oh, really, huh? So you mean to tell me Jeffrey Epstein, who was a convicted child sex trafficker, convicted sexual offender, and obviously involved in all sorts of nonsense when it comes to financials, wasn't on the government's radar? The government wasn't digging into the FinCEN database on a regular basis to see if Epstein was up to no good? Ask yourselves, folks, why? Deutsche Bank reported the transactions to a federal agency in charge of policing financial crimes, according to 3 people familiar with the bank's internal processes. The report came as the bank started looking for signs that Mr. Epstein was using his financial resources for the purposes of sex trafficking. So the bank, according to this report in the New York Times, engaged in a bit of internal house cleaning, a bit of internal investigation, and concluded that these transactions that Epstein was making were not the kind of transactions that are up to snuff, right? These transactions were the kind that you would see in a money laundering operation. And the regulators at Deutsche Bank, obviously, according to this article, flagged them. Mr. Epstein, who has been accused of operating sex trafficking ring involving dozens of victims, some as young as 14, is being held in a Manhattan jail cell, not anymore, after federal prosecutors argued he was a flight risk, citing his vast financial resources. He has a Byzantine network of businesses and personal holdings, which include real estate, an island, and private planes valued at more than $500 million. Mr. Epstein's lawyer, Reed Weingarten, did not respond to requests for comment Tuesday afternoon. No, these lawyers are never going to respond to comment, right? They don't want to, they don't, especially then, they didn't want to dig themselves any deeper. So you know that none of these lawyers have anything to say about any of this nonsense. But the fact of the matter is this. Deutsche Bank flagged these transactions, and the regulators in America and elsewhere didn't care. Deutsche Bank has been contacted by prosecutors and other government authorities investigating Mr. Epstein. Jörg Eigendorf, a Deutsche Bank spokesman, said the bank was absolutely committed to cooperating with all relevant authorities. Sounds like Prince Andrew wrote that line there, huh? Did the Joe Exotic of the Windsor family write Deutsche Bank's defense line there? Oh, well, we're committed to working with all authorities that are relevant to the case. Meanwhile, Deutsche Bank is up to their neck in all sorts of financial discrepancies. This bank is one of the biggest harbors of money laundering that you're ever going to see, in my opinion. How they didn't get arrested after the financial collapse, the whole lot of them, is absolutely beyond me. Deutsche Bank executives are still trying to understand the depth and the scope of the bank's relationship with Mr. Epstein, who has been a client of its private banking division since at least 2013, years after his conduct became public in a prostitution case involving a teenage girl. No, that was not a prostitution case, New York Times, okay? A child cannot be a prostitute. How many times do we have to make that clear? These were girls who were victimized by a sick, disgusting, sinister son of a bitch who was rubbing elbows with all your buddies at New York Times, all the politicians, etc., okay? Not a prostitution ring. Mr. Epstein struck a lenient plea deal that included a non-prosecution agreement from federal authorities, and the case has been held up as a glaring example of how the wealthy and well-connected can evade consequences. And when they say wealthy here and well-connected, well, wealthy for sure, but well-connected in Jeffrey Epstein's case is not the same as well-connected as usual. Usually somebody has some friends on the police department or maybe a judge or two. Jeffrey Epstein had a whole network of protectors that were elected officials, business people, leaders from other countries, you name it. All of these people were in Epstein's atmosphere and protecting him. I have never, ever seen anything like this in my life, folks, ever. At least one bank dropped Mr. Epstein as a client in the years after his guilty plea. But it wasn't until late last year, after the Miami Herald published an investigation into the earlier sexual abuse allegations, that Deutsche Bank decided to sever ties with him. The process proved more complicated and time-consuming than executives had initially anticipated because Deutsche Bank's private banking division had opened several dozen accounts for Mr. Epstein and his businesses. Folks, this man needed several different accounts, several dozen accounts, I mean. For what? If you're not trying to hide your money, if you're not trying to park your money in places where it can be washed and then put back into the system of, being spent by you, then why do you need several dozen accounts at Deutsche Bank? And furthermore, why would Deutsche Bank even facilitate any of this? Look, the banksters are a serious problem, folks. We are living in modern-day slavery to these people. Oh, and it might not be the slavery like the Romans would have you in bondage, right? But it's a different kind of slavery. We're slaves to their predatory loans. We're slaves to their incredibly corrupt interest rates. And they make the rules. These are the people that are really making the rules, folks. These banksters and these disgusting ass people who are the bagmen to the politicians. They show up with their Gucci bag full of loot, and the politicians dance to their tune. The bank's antique technology systems did not help. On a number of occasions, Deutsche Bank executives had thought they had shut down all of Mr. Epstein's accounts, only to learn that there were others that they had not previously been aware of, according to one of the people. How is that not a problem? This is a major financial institution, folks. Billions and billions of dollars of swaps, trades, loans, etc. And you mean to tell me you can't navigate your own internal system? You can't navigate the system you put into place to keep a hold on who has what in your bank? How can anyone have any faith in a bank like Deutsche Bank? If I had $1 single with this bank, I'd be moving it out ASAP. The bank's relationship with Mr. Epstein has been another black eye for Deutsche Bank, which is laying off thousands of employees as it struggles to return to profitability. The bank has been dogged by repeated financial scandals. It is under federal criminal investigation for potential money laundering, an investigation that has raised questions about Deutsche Bank's handling of suspicious activity reports. Well, folks, what do you know, huh? Do you think that Jeffrey Epstein just moved his money to Deutsche Bank for no reason? Why do you really think Jeffrey Epstein parked his money there? Do you think that it was because they're so stringent and they work towards making sure that everything's on the up and up? Or do you think it's because Deutsche Bank is complicit, they have a bunch of criminals in their boardroom, and they don't give a good goddamn about anything else besides the money? What do you think it is, huh? Jeffrey Epstein put his money with Deutsche Bank because he knew that they'd play ball. Two congressional committees and state prosecutors in New York have also opened investigations into the bank's relationship with President Trump, who received a total of more than $2 billion in loans from Deutsche Bank over nearly 2 decades, even as other major banks refused to do business with him. That on its face means nothing, let's be real. A bank can choose to do business with whoever they want. But the fact of the matter is, like I've said numerous times here on this podcast, I believe the Democrats wasted a bunch of time and a bunch of resources when they attempted to go after the nonsensical Russia angle. When if they really wanted to pin something on Donald Trump, all they have to do is go after his finances. And if you're really going through them, it is inevitable that you will find that he has put money in the pocket of the mafia in New York. You know why I say that? Because you're not putting a skyscraper up in that city without enriching the mafia still to this day. So if they were going to go after something, they should have went after his financials from the very beginning. But they chose a different route, and here we are, right? They look like a bunch of morons. The country looks like it's being run by a bunch of ingrates, and here we are. Still no justice in the Jeffrey Epstein case. Mr. Epstein appears to have moved his business to Deutsche Bank after J.P. Morgan cut ties with him. He had been a client of J.P. Morgan's private banking division from the late 1990s until around 2013, 5 years after he pled guilty to state prostitution charges. Well, what do you know? It might have something to do with Jess Staley, huh? I don't know. I'll just go out on a limb here and say it might have had something to do with Jess Staley while I was at J.P. Morgan. Just saying. Mr. Epstein, in addition to wealth management accounts, Deutsche Bank also provided loans to Mr. Epstein and his businesses, according to 3 people familiar with the relationship. All of those loans, every bit of money that has been given to Epstein from these banks, all of it needs to be traced. Everything needs to be sourced, and we have to find up where they originated and where they ended up, because everything in between, every person who got a taste, is now part of the RICO indictments. The relationship has been cause for concern within the bank even before the heightened scrutiny brought by the Herald's reporting. In 2015, 2016, anti-money laundering compliance officers in Deutsche Bank's offices in New York and Jacksonville, Florida, raised a variety of concerns about the work the bank was doing with Mr. Epstein. And now what happens is, in these financial institutions, they have these auditors, and they go through all of this stuff, all these transactions, and make sure everything is in compliance. And when they find something that's not in compliance, then they go into the FinCEN database, they look for SARCs, and they try and match it up. They're basically forensic accountants, right? And we see here that the compliance officers in the offices in New York and Jacksonville raised a bunch of concerns about Jeffrey Epstein's banking. In addition, the compliance officers on at least one occasion noticed potentially illegal activity in one of Mr. Epstein's accounts, including transaction which money was moving outside the United States, 2 of the people said. This is the sort of thing that the second it happened, the feds should have been all over Epstein and he should have been brought in for money laundering all over again. Guess what? Normal people like you or I or your friend Vinny, oh yeah, we're going to the clink. No doubt about it. There's going to be a huge, broad investigation into us. They're going to pull our families into it. They're going to threaten our families. They're going to try and litigate us into the poorhouse. and that's just the way it goes. But if you're Jeffrey Epstein, you can make whatever kind of transactions you want with your homies at the bank, right? They're just going to cover for you. And the investigators, well, they don't give a shit. They've been told you belong to intelligence. Hands off. So Jeffrey Epstein has free reign to make as many crazy, weird financial moves as he wants, have a child sex trafficking ring right under everyone's nose, be engaged in various other crimes, and nobody has anything to say about it, huh? The compliance officers produced a so-called suspicious activity report, but it is unclear whether the report was ever filed with the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Division. This is so crazy to think about. If I was to be involved in something like this when I was at Cantor Fitzgerald, I would have been fired the day it happened. If we would have let something like this get by, forget it. There would have been hell to pay. I would have been packing up my desk and looking for a new job that day. Despite the compliance officer's misgivings, the bank continued to do extensive business with Mr. Epstein. And that right there is the death knell for Deutsche Bank. If I was investigating them, that would be all I need to open up a robust investigation into them. If I was the prosecutors of this Epstein case, I would pull Deutsche Bank right into this RICO investigation. Point blank, period. Earlier this year, as the bank rushed to disentangle itself from him, officials discovered additional transactions that they saw as problematic, 3 people said. That prompted the bank to submit a suspicious activity report to the Treasury Department. Well, that's fine and well, but a suspicious activity report is supposed to be filed within 30 days. So Deutsche Bank, it seems like they're just trying to cover their ass here, right? Do you really think that they care about these financial crimes? I don't. I think that they were engaging in them with them. I think that they were part of them. And I think they were enriching themselves on the back of them. The nature of the bank's concerns about the 2019 transactions was not clear. Just because a bank files a suspicious activity report does not mean the transaction was actually improper. Banks sometimes are on the side of over-reporting troubling transactions to avoid government criticism that they missed red flags. That is the truth. I can tell you that for sure. We always erred on the side of, if we thought it was suspicious, let's file the SARC. Let's get it in and let's make sure it's on file and in the database. So I could definitely see that. That, from my experience, that does not ring as a lie. But I will say this. When you have somebody like Epstein and the financials that we've seen here, I would have been sarking every transaction this guy made if it was me in charge of this. Because, look, working where I worked for so long, you start to get an idea and start to get a gut feeling when somebody's coming in to your desk with all this money and they're trying to make a bet or a deposit. You start to get a feel if something's out of order or if something's, on the up and up, right? And that just comes with experience and with ample time spent doing a job. And I'm sure that these regulators who are adding him to the database and sarking him have plenty of experience, right? The report was filed with the government as Deutsche Bank conducted an internal investigation into its relationship with Mr. Epstein. Deutsche Bank officials are still trying to determine what Mr. Epstein was using his accounts for, including where and to whom he had previously moved money. We're still trying to get our arms around it, one of the people said, and that is such a huge part of it, because whoever he was moving money to, folks, if they slap this with a RICO indictments, and this becomes a RICO case, whoever Epstein was moving money to, whoever he was getting money from, they are now part of this ever-expanding RICO web. The question that I have is, when are we going to see it? If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. Inside of the description box, you will find a link to the article and also a link to the GoFundMe account if you would like to help the podcast. All right, everybody, we'll be back later on with the Daily Drop.